Hello and welcome to another edition of Dialogue, coming to you from CCTV News here in Beijing. I'm your host, Tian Wei. A number of high-profile child molestation cases in China have triggered enormous public anger in this country, particularly the fact that about half of these cases occurred in schools, and about 3/4 of those offenders are teachers and even schoolmasters. While asking to condemn these criminal acts, the country has also made it clear to apply more severe legal punishment against the offenders and work on measures to change the situation and provide a safer environment for children in the schools and elsewhere. Joining us to talk about the latest situation and the social debate to prevent child molestation here in China, we have Ms. Tong Xiaojun, who is a Child Protection Advisor with Save the Children China program. Welcome to our program. And also joining us in the studio, Mr. Edward Lehman, Managing Director of the Lehman, Lee and Xu, that's a law firm based here in Beijing. But before we go to a discussion with the two of you, let's take a look at this background report.
Inhumane, outrageous, heartbreaking. A string of child sex abuse cases has shocked the country in recent weeks. Young people have been abused by the people they trust the most: teachers, principals, and even their relatives. The cases highlight the urgent need for better child protection. The Supreme People's Court says it will show no tolerance towards such offenders and will crack down on crimes committed against juveniles. Following that announcement, one official named Li Xingong was sentenced to death for raping several adolescent girls in 2011. Later, 2 school principals from Hainan province were accused of taking 2 girls to a hotel for sex. They've now been sentenced to 11 and 13 years imprisonment. Child abuse is a serious issue that governments across the world are confronting. Former US President Bill Clinton signed legislation known as Megan's Law in 1994. It established files on known sexual molesters in an attempt to reduce opportunities for them to harm young people. In one child abuse case in South Korea, the offender has been chemically castrated. Legislation on child molestation in China still has a long way to go. Child sex abuse leads to long-term physical and psychological damage for children. Sex education is now becoming an important tool in the fight to reduce the number of sexual abuse cases. In Guangzhou, a social work centre has now been set up to help educate young girls. Similar efforts are needed to improve children's self-protection awareness, and measures must be put in place to help prevent sexual attacks against children.
Mr. Lehman, Ms. Tong, welcome to our program.
Thanks, Tim.
A Chinese official has already been executed for raping about 11 schoolgirls. That is a decision being made by China's High Court recently. Many applauded the decision. Help us to understand, Ms. Tong, how severe is the situation of child molestation here in China, particularly given some of the recent cases?
And actually, such kind of a phenomenon is a hidden phenomenon in society, not only in China but also in other countries. So it's very difficult for us to know how severe in reality it is. But just recent media exposed a lot of cases which are very severe because, you know, the victims of the child victims has suffered from such kind of abuse for a long time, and also the offenders, you know, committed such kind of crimes again and again.
Repeatedly.
Repetitively. And then the longest time, to my knowledge, is about 12 years. You know, that's, you know, what we know, how severe the problem is.
The reason to why, after such a long period of time only, that these cases be exposed to the public is because the children are not aware what they were encountering?
Right.
Or is it because these offenders are very good at covering up the facts? Or is it because that the families of the victims were not willing to speak up? Or is it because the public have not been paying much attention to cases similar like this?
The questions you asked actually are very good because they're all involved in such kind of result or reality of such a severe problem. You know, in China, first of all, the legislation system is not so, you know, sound. And then the second is cultural reason for the parents. You know, even they know their girls are abused, and then because they don't want to get it publicized, and then they keep silence. And then the third is, usually the child sexual abuse, such kind of cases have, the characteristics like, huge, unbalanced power relationship between the adult offenders and vulnerable children. Here in most of the cases, the children's age are under like 12.
10 years old,
yeah,
even
right.
8 years old.
Right. So such a young age, they don't know such kind of things. And then there are a lot of things, involved.
Mr. Lehman, your observation.
Yeah, I think Dr. Tong hit it on the head. I mean, it's a mix of all of these things. I mean, there is a certain elevation, especially, that is higher in China than any place else that I've encountered, with educators, with how you revere your teacher, and how the parents actually side with the teacher.
Right,
there isn't a big dialogue.
What do you mean by side with the teacher?
Well, I think that teachers are infallible to a certain extent in China. They're viewed as infallible. I'm not saying that that's true, but I mean, I believe that this comes down from the
Cultural tradition.
Cultural tradition, sitting for Mandarin tests. Educators are like God, and that someone would abuse you. That the parent would be in denial. The parent wants to have the child do well academically and wouldn't want to rock the boat, with the administrators or the supervisors or the teacher. So that would be the last way that they would want to recourse. So I think a cultural issue, which isn't so present as much in the United States, there's a lot of pushback. Parents are questioning teachers, they're questioning administrators all the time, not just about these kind of abuse cases, but about academics. Is this the right way to teach people and everything else? So China has this huge cultural and historical burden about how to perceive teachers. Then really we're kind of in the dark ages about encountering or discussing these issues. When I was a kid, a million years ago, but when I was a kid, they at least had started sexual education inside schools. And I think what Dr. Tong was touching on was that, to a certain extent, the students are completely unaware, and the EQ level and the maturation level about what is sexual misconduct for the students is very, very unclear. And part of that is with education, and that we have made it mandatory in the United States to have sexual education or health education, they call it in some places, starting at a very young age so that they can understand that.
Well, it seems that both of you have been touching on quite a number of issues. There are legal issues, there are educational issues, there are also ethical issues, and of course social issues, because many of these children being molested, at least in these cases, more than 70% of them are coming from migrant workers' families. So these are very complicated issues, all entangled together. Can we maybe handle them one by one? Let's just talk about the legal perspective. According to the law that we have here in China, the adult offender can in a way escape from the charges of rape if he or she pays the child that he or she is having sex with. Because with that, he or she could claim that he or she was only using a prostitute, having an improper relationship with a prostitute. However, people are saying things should change about that specific aspect of the law. Do you think that should be changed?
Well, yeah, I mean, in America, I'll just use that as an example, that there cannot be consent, they're saying, when a child is under a certain age. So even if it's so-called consensual, we see this all the time in the United States. In the United States, we've been grappling really with this issue only since about 1947, when they allowed sexual registration to happen for sexual offenders in the state of California. But what we say in our law in the United States is someone under the age of consent may not give consent. It's impossible to do that, even if it was for money, if it was for whatever she said. She may say, or he may say, I wanted to do that. That's not consent.
In other words, people or children under certain age are totally being protected.
Correct.
When we say children, means usually they're under age of 18, and then people under age of 18 are regarded as people who are vulnerable and cannot make a full decision, even informed.
This is where it gets this is where it gets complicated. I don't mean to interrupt Dr. Tong, but she's exactly right. It's 18 in the United States, but it depends even in the United States, state to state. It could be 16, it could be 17, and then it becomes very complicated in the United States. If people of the same sex have relationships, that also, is that considered to be okay? And if you're both underage? So in America, it's even very, very complicated as well.
Right.
In China, it seems to me, when I look at the law,
debate has just
it's
begun.
14 years old, which is quite young. I mean, I mean, even in most Western countries, they don't consider the idea of making a decision until you're 13.
Ms. Tong.
Yeah, but even under the age of 14 in China, the legal, the law doesn't say it's a sexual abuse. It's a prostitution. That's different.
Right.
When we say prostitution, means the female one, prostitutes, who are the ones who have the ability or competent to say yes or no, you know, to make their own decisions. But then, in the case of children, there's no way to regard them as prostitutes or.
Another issue related to the legal perspective is about the execution. This specific official has been executed. That is almost being regarded as the most severe punishment. And of course, there has been a debate all over the world about the legality and appropriateness of death sentence or death penalty. Here in China, no exception. But it seems that people have been applauded for this very specific decision made by China's High Court. But here is the thing. For a severe case, as severe as child molestation, as severe as this one who raped 11 children over the years, is death sentence or death penalty the appropriate one? We have to analyze not only from the children's perspective, but also from the offender's perspective. Even though he has committed severe crimes, he still has certain amount of human rights that he deserves. So how to weigh the exact degree of punishment for the offenders is another question, another legal and ethical question facing China.
Yeah, very good question for me because I'm not, legal professional. But,
from your perspective about protecting the children, though.
Yeah, right. From that point of view, I think, because this is the beginning of such kind of social attention to such kind of cases. So this severe punishment actually indicates a kind of a public awareness or determination of the government to saying we're going to deal with such kind of thing and children needs to be protected.
And deter those who are who will or who already.
Right. So in this sense, I really would be with that group of people who applauded such kind
Mr.
of
Lehman.
punishment.
Yeah, I too applaud it. I think the recidivism rate of child molestation or child predators is extremely high. So the recidivism, they repeat and repeat and repeat.
Right.
And this is a problem that we have in the United States. So we don't necessarily, we have had the death penalty over the course of the United States history in such cases. We don't have it, we have chemical castration in 7 states right now, but there has been death penalty in such cases, and I do applaud that this is a step that has to be taken. I am not sure, and this is probably an answer for someone like Dr. Tong, to take a look at about whether they can be rehabilitated. I don't know that they can be, and I think that this debate is still open in the United States, and I think that severe measures need to be taken. As Dr. Tong said, the problem is we don't really have in China the framework to protect children. We don't have police officers who are trained to talk to children. We don't have judicial people who are trained to talk to children.
It seems to be a whole new set of tasks facing the whole country, it seems, Dr. Tong.
Yeah, what Dr. Lehman said actually opens a new area, services for the victims or the services for, like what you said, the criminals or the offenders. They have their rights too, and they need to be helped or supported or to see whether they can be rehabilitated.
Correct, yeah.
All those kind of things. But nothing is there in our society. There's no system there saying, okay, who is going to take that responsibility to see, to monitor the children, whether they are safe, or if they are not, then how to detect, they are abused or they're victimized or whatever, and then who should report to, and then after the reporting, then who is going to? Yeah, right.
Exactly. There are a whole set of questions that urgently need to have their answers. But we're going to discuss some of these issues at least during our program. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to Watching Dialogue on CCTV News. I'm Tian Wei. With me in the studio once again, we have Mr. Edward Lehman, who is Managing Director of Lehman, Lee & Xu. That's a law firm based here in China. And we also have Ms. Tong Xiaojun, the Child Protection Advisor for Save the Children here in China as well. Our topic, of course, involves the protection of children here in China with the rising cases of child molestation in this country over the past few years. Earlier, we've been talking about the legal perspective, about how to design the appropriate laws to protect children's rights, and also how to punish those offenders appropriately. But there are many other aspects that both of you touched on earlier. For example, about the educational system, about what are some of the contents should be provided to the children so that they are aware of their own bodies and they're aware of their own rights from an early age. Dr. Tong, what exactly is the stage that China is in when it comes to sexual education? Providing children, middle school, high school, and also in the primary school, about their own bodies.
And to my knowledge, the sexual education in China actually is, lacks that kind of education, because the only content relevant to that issue is about the physical development. You know, when you when the students enter the adolescence age or phase, and then the teachers would teach them, you know, how different the boys and girls are different, and then what are the differences, and then how that differences would affect or impact your development or your behavior or whatever, you know, those kind of things. But then here, this is about the body itself. But in terms of self-protection, or with a life skill, you know, education, then the whole thing is not there. And then I know some of my colleagues have been working on that, you know, compiling the textbooks, and then find the schools who would like to really include that content into their curriculum.
Well, these can be very important, as both of you mentioned, but one could also counter-argue and suggesting, well, what about, let's say, in the West? Earlier we hear from the United States, for example, or from some of the European countries, some in the church have been violating the rights of the children, some football coach in certain very well-known teams have been violating children's rights. So it seems that they've been having certain amount of already the sex education from an early age, why there are still a lot of cases like that. So it seems that these counter-arguments are also making sense.
No, they are. I mean, you're right. There's been education in the state, Pennsylvania State University, with this very well-known case of an assistant coach there who was abusing children and has now been put in prison. Now, we had education in place, and that failed. But it's what Dr. Tong was talking about earlier, which is when you have uneven situation, a child doesn't have a fully developed capability to say no or to make a decision. And so we've recognized that in the West. Then you have a football program, for example, in Pennsylvania State, which is revered almost like religion and almost like Chinese look at academics. And you have people who cannot say no. And this guy was a leader in that organization. And so, but you see it in the Catholic Church too. It was unequal. This person was revered. The parents were siding with the priest and not with the other thing. And so you see this unequal
and that
with
has
the migrant
been repeatedly
workers.
happening over the years.
Exactly.
And to me, what your question doesn't mean is about it's related to two issues. One is about, you know, even we have. It doesn't mean if you have the education and then the cases wouldn't happen. That's not the case, you know. But so the education, we need that education to everybody to, you know, to help themselves and then protect themselves as much as possible. But then here we need to have other system to say, if such kind of cases happen, then how we can find such kind of issues as quickly as possible, and then to save the children.
Right.
To, you know.
But not only that, I mean, and I agree. It's what else happens is that This was all in the shadows, even in the United
Yeah.
States, which is extremely progressive, situation in society. And we've started, like I said, to address this in the 1940s, and then in the 1960s, and then in the 1990s, and it's really the 2007 with the Adam Walsh or the John
Right.
Walsh Act. A number of things happened just very recently, and so we're also in denial. I mean, I think that all these countries are in denial about these things
Yeah.
happening, and we don't want it to come into the forefront. This is so this is
Yeah,
part of
actually,
the
the research already indicates that such kind of child sexual abuse cases, are not related to, skin, the color of the skin, or the race, or the nationalities, or whatever, or the social status or economic status. It happens all the time, everywhere. So it's not like, the poverty or child poverty. If you have the economic development, and then the poverty would be relieved.
Right.
But then here, child sexual abuse, such kind of cases exist from the beginning of the history, and then we have it now, and I'm sure we'll have it in future. But so deal with such kind of thing, then what we could do is to try to get everybody involved in this, to increase our competence, how to prevent such kind of things from happening. And then at the same time, we need to build that legislation system to persecute the victims or offenders. And then at the same time, we need to have another system to provide services to help the victims to rehabilitate from that
Well,
trauma.
yes, there are a number
Right.
of things, quite a number of things, when we
Yeah,
put it
yeah.
to do. We mentioned at the very beginning of our show already, but here you see such a rise of cases just over the past few years. It might be because of the social media that can put
Yeah.
more cases in front of the public eyes more efficiently. It might be that people's awareness has been rising and as
Yes.
a result, or it might be investigations against corruption that help with, let's say, identify some of the schoolmasters and teachers who've been doing this very bad behavior. But here's the thing, the public is angry. And how to channel the public anger to a direction that can be beneficial to some of the measures both of you mentioned, whether it's legal, ethical, or educational aspects. How to do this? Earlier we see some very much black satire on China's internet. People just put out a paper and write on the paper and say, I volunteer to speak, rather to sleep with the headmaster. It is a way that the public is trying to make a satire against the phenomenon, saying, don't harm our kids.
Right.
Sleep with, quote unquote, me. But actually, it's a way people to express themselves and say, this is something that has to be handled urgently, immediately, and how can we help?
For me, I highly appreciate the bravery or encouragement or that kind of anger, in the public, because that means our whole society have been mobilized to do something, right? So to me, the most important thing or the quick thing we can do is to start a kind of education system. The system is not very formal, like communities for the parents, because, all the cases show that the parents, even when their kids complained, how uncomfortable they are and how unwilling they go to school, but then the parents don't realize or didn't realize that's a kind of zigzag way for the kids to express, to tell them, I am abused.
Right,
or,
but at the same time, there are a lot of kids that really don't want to go to school out of no reasons at all.
So that's
how to identify these cases
right.
also is a tricky issue.
Right. So that's why we say we need to educate parents first, to tell them what kind of signs you need to pay attention to once you're, if the kids usually are very open-hearted and happy,
or suddenly
sudden change, don't want to go to school, have a kind of special relationship with someone's friend.
I'm sure a lot of these
kind of
details
things
can be provided to the parents, but how to channel that kind of anger to make sure it is going to be positive and also help with some of the progresses that is urgently needed.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's, you said it exactly. That's the difficult bit, because of when we have a civil law system here, we have to set up the laws, policies, and regulations which are not in place. even if we had the laws, policies, and regulations in place, then we have enough actual people who are qualified to implement these things? Whether they're, I mean, in America we have a judiciary that is aimed just at helping children, children's courts, family courts, these types of things. And we need something like that here. We have police force that is just able to deal with that as well. And so these are very specialized persons. So even if we started tomorrow, I agree. I agree with the tendency of the idea to decide that this is a tipping point. What I see, Tianwei, is a tipping point on the public. The public is going to demand legislators going to be able to put these rules and regulations in place. Do I think it's going to be solved in a year or two? The answer is no. But I do believe that the netizens are bringing this to the public, and that this has always been with us. The netizens are the ones who've actually brought it to the attention.
But at the same time, how important it is to make sure that all of these legal terms should be newly developed are going to be appropriate and also based on enough and appropriate research. They are not necessarily going to be empty laws and can be implemented, and how to make sure the right degree of sexual education can be provided to the children and to the parents, and how to make sure how to change to the positive side the Chinese society so that it can be more nourishing to the children. All of these are long-term goals.
That's right.
What can we do now?
I mean, for the, you know, this is the whole thing actually is regarded the construction of a child protection system, and then to building a system there are four components to me. There's one is philosophy, you know, what kind of things you believe about our children, you know, to providing the safe environment for children to develop or to grow, and second is the legal thing, the documents, you know, you provide people saying you should do this, you cannot do that. And then the third one is the administration system or the structure of the organizations who provide such kind of services. And then for those a structure to run, to operate, and then we need to have money, and then we need to have people.
Absolutely. Everything involves all of these important factors. Final words from you, Mr. Lehman.
Yeah, I mean, again, frustration levels at an all-time high. Don't take the law into your own hands. I mean, that's the problem. I think there's a frustration with the lack of infrastructure, and I think, you know, this is good. The netizens should be monitoring, and we're glad that that's happened. It's brought to the forefront. We're having a discussion about it today. I think that the future is going to be bright, that we're now addressing these issues. It's out of the shadows, and we've got a way forward.
And let's work on it. We want to thank the two of you for being with us on this very important topic for our children. We want to thank you, Ms. Tong Xiaojun and Mr. Edward. Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for watching. I'm Tianwei in Beijing. Bye.